We're continuing our study on systematic theology, part 1 of lesson 33, the doctrine concerning the law. We had a dean at the junior high school I went to. His name was Mr. Egloff. That name I remember well. He was a burly gentleman who you'd say hi to if you passed him in the hallway between classes, and he'd say hello back, and you never wanted him to know your name, because he'd only have one reason to know it. Back then, parents could sign a corporal punishment form allowing teachers and faculty to spank you. Those were the days. I won't say my parents signed that form looking giddy, but it certainly seemed like it. They never refused to sign it with permission granted. Every student had to turn that form in, either giving or refusing permission. Giving seemed to be the unanimous choice back then, one reason kids behaved more. Mr. Egloff had a special paddle made for him, I don't know by whom, but it had 4 holes drilled into it and the phrase, "The Board of Education," etched into it. I never had his board tested on my backside. I'd had others test theirs, but not his. I did know those who did, and they told me you could feel each of those holes on every paddle slap. We were all a little scared of him, even though if you stopped to talk to him, he'd treat you with respect and listen. We listened to him with both respect and fear. We never wanted to be sent to his office. He was the dean. He was faculty, and in the old days, he would have been called a schoolmaster. Back then, we would have called him anything he wanted to. He was, after all, Mr. Egloff. The Old Testament was our schoolmaster, and the law that God gave to Moses would have been the dean. The 10 Commandments each begin by one of 4 phrases. Respect, honor, and thou shalt have no was each used once. Thou shalt not is the beginning of the other 7. That phrase meant that whatever followed was neither suggestion nor an option. The act that phrase covered meant not to do it, ever. In this lesson, we'll look at the law and see the difference between then and now. Question 1. Where is the briefest statement of God's law found? On at least 8 different occasions, Moses ascended Mount Sinai. On at least one visit, he spent 40 days with the Lord. This wasn't receiving a quarter of a commandment each day. It was receiving the entirety of the law. During this particular visit, the Israelites began believing Moses, in his 80s, had perished on the mount, and appealed to Aaron to make them a symbol for their divine leadership, a replacement for Moses. Aaron made them a calf of gold, which he referred to as the Lord. This led, on the mount, to an interesting conversation between God and Moses, with Moses returning with the basis for the law on 2 tablets of stone, which in his own anger he destroyed. The contents of those tablets are recorded in Exodus chapter 20, beginning of verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me, and shewing mercy unto the thousands of them that love me, and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Question number 2. Where is the fullest statement of God's law found? Because of the failure of the Israelites to obey the Lord and enter and destroy the enemies of God who resided there, they wandered in the desert until they all died off, the exceptions being Caleb and Joshua. God had Moses lead these next two new generations to the Jordan. God had promised Moses he could see the promised land, but wouldn't enter it because of his own sin. At the base of Mount Pisgah, Moses spoke to the assembly. Here, to this generation and beyond, he wanted to accomplish three things. First, that this wasn't about him. He had been their physical leader, but God was the true ruler of Israel. Second, that he was replaceable. Joshua would be the one to lead them over Jordan and into the promised land, meaning that one of the two spies whose opinion was rejected by everyone was now in charge. Lastly, he would cover in great detail this law God had given them, explaining it without any errors that might have crept in from the generation that knew that they would die in the desert. Where is the fullest statement of God's law found? The entirety of the book of Deuteronomy. Question number 3. What are the three great feasts required by the law? A feast is a time of celebration. Yes, when someone we know passes away, more often as not, food is brought over to allow those most involved with the deceased to concentrate on what is necessary for the time. That isn't what we would call a feast. On Nisan 15, the day after Passover, was a feast of unleavened bread, a 7-day feast. Unleavened bread reflected the fact that the Israelites had no time to put leaven in their bread before their departure from Egypt. The second feast, the Feast of the Firstfruits, was always held on a Sunday during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And in a 7-day feast, at least one of those days is always going to be a Sunday. We read in Leviticus chapter 23, beginning of verse 9, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then shall ye bring a sheaf of the firstfruits of your harvest unto the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath the priest shall wave it." Now Christ was resurrected on the feast of the firstfruits. This was by design. He was the firstfruit of the dead we read of in 1 Corinthians 15 and 20. But now is Christ risen from the dead and become the firstfruits of them that slept. The third feast is the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, a 7-day feast following the ingathering of the harvest from Tishrei 15 to 21. This is a holiday of rejoicing and celebration for which the people are commanded to build a hut, or sukkah, the plural of which being sukkot, which is how many of us know it, and to make it their home. The Torah identifies the sukkah with the temporary dwellings in which the Israelites lived in the wilderness after they left Egypt on their way to the Promised Land. Leviticus chapter 23, beginning of verse 41, "And ye shall keep it a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. Ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths." There are other feasts, but these are the ones required by the law when all males were required to appear before the Lord. This is covered in Exodus chapter 23, beginning of verse 14. "3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the time appointed of the month Abib. For in it thou comest out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. In the feast of harvest, the firstfruits of thy labors, which thou hast sown in the field. In the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. 3 times in the year all thy males shall appear before the Lord God." Question number 4. What did the law command concerning tithes? Many times we refer to the Sunday's collection as paying our tithes, but we come nowhere close to doing that. Giving 10% of your paycheck is just the frosting on the cake. Tithes go far beyond that. Luckily, we aren't commanded to tithe, but ask to give as the Lord has prospered us. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 begins, Now concerning the collection for the saints, I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. Under grace, 10% is neither the goal nor the cap on what we give to the Lord. We can give as little or as much as we want, but we should desire to show our gratitude for how He has allowed us to prosper and give accordingly. But there is so much more to tithing in the law. Beginning in Leviticus chapter 27 at verse 20, And if he will not redeem the field, or if he hath sold the field to another man, it shall not be redeemed any more. For the field, when it goeth out in the Jubilee, shall be holy unto the Lord, as a field devoted. The possession thereof shall be the priest. And if a man sanctify unto the Lord a field which he hath bought, which is not of the fields of his possession, then the priest shall reckon unto him the worth of thy estimation, even unto the year of the Jubilee. And he shall give thine estimation in that day as an holy thing unto the Lord. In the year of the Jubilee the field shall return unto him of whom it was bought, even to him to whom the possession of the land did belong. And all thy estimation shall be according to the shekel of the sanctuary. 20 gerahs shall be the shekel. Only the firstling of the beast, which shall be the Lord's firstling, and no man shall sanctify it, whether it be ox or sheep. It is the Lord's. And if it be of an unclean beast, then he shall redeem it according to thine estimation, and shall add a fifth part of it thereto. Or if it be not redeemed, then it shall be sold according to thy estimation. Notwithstanding no devoted thing, then a man shall devote unto the Lord of all that he hath, both of man and beast, and of the field of his possession shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy unto the Lord. None devoted, which shall be devoted of men, shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. And all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. And if a man will at all redeem aught of his tithes, he shall add thereto the fifth part thereof. And concerning the tithe of the herd or of the flock, even of whatsoever passeth under the rod, the 10th shall be holy unto the Lord. Question number 5. What was the penalty for idolatry? Idolatry is basically ignored or redefined today. There are those who commit idolatry all the time and think nothing of it. Some seem to be unaware of what they're doing, even as they do it. Take, for example, astrology. It isn't something to read for fun. It's studying the word of the stars. And if some Christians would study the word of God as much as they read their horoscopes, that would at least be an improvement. They let these stars influence their life more than they do God. That's idolatry, plain and simple, like it or not. Buddhists are idolaters. So are Taoists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Satanists obviously, as well as Muslims, and all those religions that aren't centered on the one true God. In fact, if God is not first in our life, whatever is has become our idol, taking the place God deserves. According to the law, what is to be done with idolaters? We read that in Deuteronomy chapter 13, beginning at verse 9. But thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. And thou shalt stone him with stones that he die, because he hath sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Question number 6. What did the law require for a stubborn son? Now, just to be honest, my older brother would not have made it to his teenage years if we lived under the law. Today, we aren't supposed to paddle our children. And for some reason, many don't understand why we have so many juvenile delinquents today. Simple answer is this. There's a direct correlation between those two bits of information. When we were growing up, my mother had no fear or apprehension about paddling any of us kids in the middle of the grocery store. She certainly didn't have to worry about someone calling the cops on her. People had sense back then. She was ignored because she was simply doing what a parent is supposed to be doing, raising up her kids properly. And there was no such thing as the double jeopardy rule back then. Not only could our parents whip us, they gave permission to the school and our neighbors to do the same. So if we misbehaved at Jackie's house, Jackie would spank us, and then she'd tell our mom she had to, and why. Then Mom would paddle us, and then when Dad got home from work, he would lecture us, which sometimes actually was worse than the paddling, and then he would whip us. My father's a big man. Taking his belt off wasn't a simple event. However, he had the ability to clear every single belt loop with a single tug if he was getting ready to whip us. Can you imagine how much better our society would be if we still did this? I miss the good old days. But not the good Old Testament days because they were really strict. There are basically two types of punishment given out to an offender. Restorative punishment allows the offender the opportunity to set things right, to return things taken, to apologize, to help things become as they were before. It allows the offender to learn a lesson so as not to repeat it. However, retributive punishment is punishment for the sake of punishment. Whereas prison time is restorative, executions are retributive. Retributive punishment can be phrased up into two simple words: problem eliminated. This is how the law solved a problem with a stubborn or rebellious child. What did the law require for a stubborn son? Deuteronomy 21, beginning at verse 18. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father, or the voice of his mother, and that, when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him, and bring him out unto the elders of the city, and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Question number 7. What was the penalty for breaking the Sabbath? Under the law, there was no gray area. Everything was either black or white, because no lawyers were ever involved with this law. Now, what did the law say concerning the Sabbath? Exodus 20, verses 8, 9, and 10. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant or thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. Now there was no weekend under the law. 6 days shalt thou labor. It's recorded in verse 9. Nowadays we've reduced that to 5, and many still don't rest 1 day a week. Under the law, this was not a suggestion. It was a command with repercussions when broken. What was the penalty for breaking the Sabbath? Numbers chapter 15, beginning at verse 32. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron, and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, The man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp, and stoned him with stones, and he died, as the Lord commanded Moses. Last question. Does anyone keep the law nowadays? This is something that's been claimed by many, even in the Old Testament times while under the law. The purpose of the law was to define sin, and we're all sinners. Many can keep most of the 10 Commandments, but again, that's just the cornerstone of the law, not its entirety. When you buy a new vehicle, are you giving God the tithe of the vehicle? As your possession, it has increased your value. Are you traveling more than a Sabbath day's journey on the Sabbath? Generously speaking, if you travel more than 8,000 cubits, that's another law broken. The law is so exacting that it makes us realize that by ourselves, we cannot please God. Luckily, God has given us an alternative. In the conclusion to this lesson, we're going to ask, is the law given by Moses still in effect? How did Christ fulfill the law? Do we have any rule for living? Conclusion of lesson 33.